Hello to Harrisburg and to Central Pennsylvania. I am Lenwood Sloan, your host and time traveler for Conversations in Continuum. And I have the privilege and the honor of spending this time with Mr. T. Morris Chester of Harrisburg, New Orleans, and the world. Greetings, Mr. Chester, and thank you so much for being with us for this time.
Greetings, Mr. Sloan.
Mr. Chester, you come back to us at a time when there is a full life-size statue of you standing at the Commonwealth South lawn in honor of the 15th Amendment. We are sitting in the studios of Channel 20, which is on Walnut Street, also known as Chester Way. And 1 block from us is the Thomas Morris Chester Research and Welcome Center. How do you find this visit with so many honors and acknowledgments of your time here?
Well, sir, I'm certainly humbled to know that the world and this community thought that much of the work that I spent my life, that I was groomed by my predecessors and pioneers, including my parents, to see the name on the street and to know about the research center and just to be in the vicinity that I spent many years. It looks a lot different than when I was here.
Yes, sir. We're a block away from where your family's oyster house was, and also a block away from Chestnut Street, where your mother lived and you spent your last hours on this earth.
Indeed. I believe from this area I could get to either of those locations and addresses in just under 5 minutes, perhaps.
In under 5 minutes, you are from your orbit, your origins, and your completion of life. Sir, your parents were great entrepreneurs, activists in 1838 at the time that Pennsylvania, and most people in Pennsylvania do not realize that African American freemen and freedmen voted in Pennsylvania until 1838. That year, your parents, who were activists, lost their right to vote. And how did that affect the work that they did in future years?
Well, being that my parents were in, I guess you could say, on the eastern part of Pennsylvania, those in the west had more liberties. In fact, at the time, the Republican Party there um, did allow some to vote, the freemen. But as we are closer to Philadelphia, where there was much more antagonism against Negro men desiring to vote, there was a little bit of trouble stirred up. And so my parents were certainly in conversation with many of those who passed through their restaurant, particularly those who would have discussions about what William Lloyd Garrison's Liberator would talk about and discuss some of those issues in the paper which we sold at our restaurant.
Let's talk about those restaurants for a moment, sir. Several prominent oyster houses, including one in the basement of the courthouse where Mordecai McKinney and other great lawyers practice. Would you talk about your parents and their enterprises here in Harrisburg?
Certainly. My parents, as I would guess I was begin with my mother, she was enterprising. She had to be, given her past, having been born in Virginia and then sold to one in Maryland, and then escaping to York, Pennsylvania. So I knew that she had the the um, the drive to do many things, and then coming to the Harrisburg area, meeting my father, and then together they were able to establish their restaurant business, primarily with oysters, but um, I believe chicken and biscuits was probably on the menu as well. And even after my father's passing in 1859, my mother continued to to grow her business, particularly as she did catering, as she connected with some of her good friends and associates like Harriet Smith in Columbia, and they did things together. And then having had a reputation in the community with those who were uh, more, I guess, affluent, and so she was able to maintain a the business, and perhaps I believe she had some employees there as well.
And your parents provided you with an excellent education, sir. Would you talk about your early education and also your years in Pittsburgh at Avery College?
Indeed, indeed. And so when I was 16, my parents paid for me, allowed for me to go to Avery College, which is outside of Pittsburgh, and there I met, of course, some of the those who had been taught and trained by Martin Delaney. I believe last name, can't think of his first name. Last name Trotter. I believe it's Benjamin Trotter, if
Yes,
I'm not mistaken.
Benjamin Trotter. Yes, sir.
And so there, although my parents were staunch abolitionists, the men that I was under their tutelage, and they had the disillusion by what was happening in America. And so Liberia, Africa, was a place that came up often, and they referred to that as colonization, where we didn't just want to be free, but we wanted to have all the rights and privileges that the amendments, the 13th and 14th and amendments, um, for other free men and freedmen.
This is a very important point, sir, because colonization is one of the misunderstood elements of emancipation. And so there were two forms of colonization. One where white citizens desired to buy ships and send freedmen and emancipated men back to Africa, and one where freemen and freedmen desired to start new nations. Tell us about your work in Africa with Mr. Delaney and on your own as a teacher and educator.
Well, my first time, I went several times across the Atlantic to Liberia, but my first time there was to attend school at Alexandria High School there in Monrovia. And when I returned here, I then went to Thetford College in Vermont, but I returned back there um, to actually teach, and began the Star of Liberia newspaper. But there I tried my hands in some politics, but that wasn't a good effort for me. But not just in Liberia, but also there were those who the discussion had come up to take freedmen and some freedmen that desired to Haiti, a place where there were indigenous men and women and families from Africa. Um, I don't think many made it there, but it was certainly an idea that many had. And I must say this, that many do not understand that our president then, Abraham Lincoln, um, was more for the Union. That was his statement, that he desired for the country to maintain the Union as opposed to allowing women of color to have all the rights and privileges. That will be the only way uh, that we would be able to be full citizens of these United States.
This is very important. I understand that it was your mother who encouraged you to come back to America at the breakout of the Civil War. Sir, would you speak to?
Indeed. And so I returned here to America, and I was very fortunate to have landed a job with the Philadelphia Press. And I began that in August of 1864. And I spent most of my time along the Richmond front, the Army of the James, there and near Gettysburg. And I was glad to be able to be an eyewitness to see how our soldiers, our colored troops, were fighting gallantly on the battlefront, but also to see the mindset of the Confederates, that they were very treacherous, particularly if we would have been captured. And that didn't just go for Negro men. That went also particularly for white officers. They would have similar punishment done to them.
Let me go backward to go forward, sir, if you will. When you came back to Harrisburg, I understand you formed a citizens militia
Yes.
to protect. Talk to us about that in the Eighth Ward.
Indeed, indeed. And so the Confederates were making their way swiftly in the Cumberland Valley, coming towards Harrisburg, and I was asked to form a militia. And of course, Negroes had not been given weapons, and that was thought of by many as to be a threat. But we were allowed to form this militia, and before we were able to go into any type of battle, um, we did not have to do that. And of course, the weapons were taken back out of our hands.
You were to protect the city of Harrisburg.
We were trying to protect the city of Harrisburg from any further incursion by the Confederates.
Now let me go back a little further still, sir, to that important meeting that you held with your colleagues at the Bethel AME Church. The year was 1863. The event was the passage of the Emancipation Proclamation on January 1st of 1863. And the event I'm referring to was a meeting of the freemen and freedmen at Bethel to write a response to Mr. Lincoln. So tell us about that event, sir.
Well, we had gathered there at Bethel ME, and to express our, I guess you could say, our discontent that we still had not been able to fully engage as Negro men to earn our rights. We desired to earn our rights so that our white counterparts would see that we were not yellow belly, that we desired to have lived the same lifestyle that they had for our children, for our families. And so, although they were men of the faith and women of the faith who gathered there together, they were also men and women who knew that our rights had been violated, our godly rights. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. And so we desired to do all that we could to make sure that we were a part of establishing our rights, and that the whole world, particularly these United States of America, would see that we participated, we shed blood, and we deserve the same inalienable rights as our white counterparts.
And Mr. Chester was part of a delegation of 65 to 70 African Americans from the 8th Ward of Harrisburg and Central Pennsylvania who delivered a response to Mr. Lincoln. Now, sir, I have done you a disservice by not also identifying you as a barrister, as in fact England's first black barrister. Could you share with us how that came to be?
Indeed, sir. So after I had completed my tour of duty with the Philadelphia Press, which didn't happen until actually June of 1865. Although the war ended in 1865, there were still some loose ends, I could guess you could say, that I had to do for the Philadelphia Press, and to complete some stories. And so I desired to go back to Europe, where I had met many men, in particular around 1867, I believe it was, when I was able to meet uh, um, Alexander Dumas, and I'm trying to think of some of the other men, but we gathered together. I even spent some time there in Russia with the Tsar of Russia, and that's how I believe got my name as being captain. They honored my work in the military. But there, I went on from there to 67 to go to the Inns of Court in England, and there I studied for my law license. There they called them barristers, so I became the first Negro to earn that licensing in the country of England, and then returned back to the U.S., where I began to do some practice in Louisiana, and have some other positions there with the government, with the superintendent of schools, and also the militia. And so it was a wonderful experience spending that time, but also left some connections there if I feel desire to go back to speak on behalf of Negro people, that I had some alliances there.
So, sir, that brings us to 1870 with the passage of the 15th Amendment, which for African Americans in Pennsylvania is a return of the vote, not a first privilege, but a restoration of the vote. What was it like in Harrisburg in central Pennsylvania on that day when the 15th Amendment was passed?
Well, when that 15th Amendment was passed, there was just jubilation amongst the Negro people here in Harrisburg to know that we were able to um, have a documented license and license to vote. Although we understand that there were states' rights and that there were other small groups that still would desire to prevent us from voting. Again, particularly in the eastern side of the state of Pennsylvania, Philadelphia area, particularly. And one of the groups that had a large influence on trying to prevent us from voting were the Irish, particularly those associated with fire companies. And they had an established group. They were organized, and their intimidation. In fact, as we know, because of that, one of our martyrs, I guess you could say, during that time, Octavio Cato, was killed in that vicinity.
Yes, Mr. Cato was shot in 1872 uh, on his way to vote in Philadelphia's Seventh Ward. You and Mr. Cato had been grand marshals together of the Grand Review of the United States Colored Troops. And would you talk about that time when and why did Harrisburg have a Grand Review?
Well, we had the Grand Review. As we know, the war ended in April of 1865, 1864, after those 5 Aprils that it covered. And when there was a parade, a celebration of the Union winning the war, uh, Negro troops, U.S. colored troops, were not invited to that celebration. And so, along with the Equal Rights League of Pennsylvania and the Garnet League, specifically in Harrisburg, um, made contact with other U.S. colored troops in Pennsylvania in particular, but there were some other states. And so, on November 14th of 1865, we had a Grand Review march beginning with Soldiers Grove and marching by the former Secretary of War's house, Simon Cameron, down Front Street. And there we paraded down there. And again, there was celebration for days to come, not just on that particular day, but in days to come. We were so excited that we could get the recognition for the work that we had done for the victory.
Mr. William Howard Day, whose statue stands with yours on the Capitol's South Lawn, was the keynote speaker. You and Mr. Cato were grand marshals, and years later, Mr. Cato was shot in the street for trying to vote.
Indeed.
Sir, I must tell you that my heart is my home is in Harrisburg, but my heart is in New Orleans, and I discovered that you had an illustrious career there too.
Well, again, as I returned to the States in 1870, after receiving my barrister's license, I went to New Orleans. And there I was able to have some of my first practices in the court system there in New Orleans in particular, and also working with the school system and the militia there. Um, that's where you could say I got my feet wet uh, in the court system and the practice of law. And again, wherever I've gone, I've made some alliances, and there I certainly made some alliances there as well.
Sir, at the end of Walnut Street, which we call the Chester Way, which was renamed by the mayor, is the Chester Research Library and Welcome Center. And you're quite familiar with libraries. We're still reviewing your speech to the Philadelphia Library Company. And would you speak about that experience, about literacy and the importance of literacy in education?
Indeed. So that occurred on December 11th in 1862 there in Philadelphia at the Philadelphia Library, their company. And this was a place where lots of intellectuals would gather to read books that were there and to give lectures in lyceums. And I would assume that this was some of the same kinds of discussion that took place at those grand universities in Africa of Sankore and Timbuktu, and we were simply duplicating some of that. But my particular speech there in December of 1862 was self-respect, I believe, if my memory suits me right, and the pride of race. And I wanted to make sure that we first were pride in who we were, proud, and that just like my parents were able to uh, get me provide me with an education, that I could then pass that back. And so um, this was it was an opportune time for, I guess one would say, the intellectuals, but also it also had afforded even women eventually to participate in more collectively with the men, uh, as it took some time for that to occur.
50 years between the 15th Amendment in 1870 and the 19th Amendment in 1920. Pennsylvania was the fourth state in the Union to ratify the 15th Amendment and the seventh state in the Union to ratify the 19th Amendment. And yet, Mr. Chester, all 9 counties of central Pennsylvania voted against women's rights to vote. Uh, you and your mother and your family had long pushed for suffrage for women. How do you see that struggle as you come back amongst us in these days?
Well, I'd like to believe that women have been given uh, more rights with regards um, to voting and holding positions in government, in both civic and at the national level. And I believe there were some who paved the way with their oratorical skills, in particular, as they traveled around. And I can think of Frances Harper as being one who was able to um, let the voice of women be heard, as she also connected with those within the Pennsylvania Abolition Society, and as she traveled to Maryland and Ohio, and she connected with other women. And so there was a collective of women who were able to voice the deep sentiments that women had. And I believe that had an impact on the men of that time who were leading the cause for voters' rights.
Now, this street is called Chester Way. It goes from Commonwealth Avenue to Front Street and connects the monument on the South Lawn to the Chester Library. So, what was the Chester Way? Mr. Chester, you lived a long, long life, and you changed as the foreground as the background of politics changed also. What should we know about the Chester Way of dealing with the quest for freedom?
Indeed. The Chester Way was, and I would include in that Tanner's Alley. Uh, it was a way of, you might say, even a passageway, like the Underground Railroad, where although there were bounty hunters, and even my mother's uh, coming to Harrisburg was always under threat because of how she got to York and then to Harrisburg. of having escaped. And so Harrisburg, although it was a safe haven to many, it was also a place where bounty hunters would frequent, and but it was also where there was a culture of um, many cultures that were here, and it wasn't as much of a difference. We didn't have the same type of discriminatory practices because we were all in the same state of economics here in the city. So whether they were Greek or whether they were Russian or from Poland, or wherever they were from, we were able to establish a kind of synergy here in the city of Harrisburg, and also the cultural life. Jacob Compton's big band and others who traveled through here, the couple of the theaters that were in the Eighth Ward here in Harrisburg. And so it was a great time to be in Harrisburg, although we always knew that we were always under the threat of the bounty hunter coming to look for and taking us back across the Mason-Dixon line.
And Mr. McAllister's bounty office is right across the street from where we're sitting, sir. So right across the street from where we're sitting. So, Mr. Chester, in closing, with this great abundant life that you saw and the rise and fall of freedoms, the rise and fall of justice, what would you like to say in particular to those who are inhabiting in this time and place in Harrisburg? What can you bring forward for us that might be a guiding light or a lighthouse in a very dark time?
Well, sir, I would go back one to my speech at the uh, library company in Philadelphia, December 11th, 1862. And I would say that we must maintain a pride of race and culture, um, that we must have self-respect, and we must provide an education early in life for our children, that we can't get too busy, even as my parents worked the restaurant, and it was quite busy, but they also found time for uh, my siblings to be educated. Of course, my sister Charlotte was the first Negro teacher here in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. And although they lost 5 of their 12 children early in life, they made sure that we were able to get the best education we could. And so we can read to our children just as we had the readings and license and the various speeches that were at the library company. We must duplicate some of those same things because I believe children are probably um, seeing things a little bit different. But I believe the Creator is giving the children and the youth greater insight. They're perhaps learning quicker. At least I hope they're learning quicker of how to solve conflicts in their life. And certainly the Civil War was a major conflict and a lot of lessons to take from that.
And in closing, sir, speaking of conflicts, uh, you have seen wars, you have seen presidents and administrations rise and fall across the space of time. Uh, what advice would you give us as we continue on the quest for freedom?
The advice I would give as we continue on the quest for freedom, even as I've read some of the daily newspapers here, I believe one is the Patriot News, and I still see the headlines that I dispatch from the front lines in Richmond about wars and rumors of wars. But I would say that we should uh, learn some lessons from that. And although we must always maintain a strong defense of our communities, that we also um, must be willing to hand the olive branch even to our enemies while maintaining our position and defense of our communities, our neighborhoods, and even our nation.
you can witness Mr. Chester's full-life statue at the South Lawn in front of the Irvis Building at 4th and Walnut Street. You can travel down Chester Way to the Dauphin County Library and find him in the Chester Research Collection with over 158 books on the topics and the subjects of your life, sir. So we appreciate you being in our presence. And I will end by saying, why do you come back?
I come back because there's some business unfinished. I would say that my life was somewhat premature in my being called home to glory, but I still have that same curiosity that I had when I ran around the restaurant as I saw the men reading papers and discussing issues about freedom. And so I've come back and continue to come back to see what changes. So if I can open up a newspaper, perhaps I will find how some of those changes have been made. After all, I am a journalist.
Yes, sir. And you were a lighthouse in your time. May you be a beacon on the path of our quest for freedom. Thank you very much.
And thank you, Mr. Sloan.
These are Conversations in Continuum. I am Lenwood Sloan, your host and time traveler, and you can catch me almost in any decade, in any generation, right here on Channel 3.